Welcome back to Coffee with Chloe, and today we are going to be reviewing the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So, I did start this book last night at like 8 p.m. and I then finished it this morning at 9 a.m. It's like 1 p.m. I said I was going to stop after 150 pages, but I checked my schedule and I didn't have work this morning, so I was like, what's the harm? So first, I am not a horror connoisseur. I've honestly not even read I've read 2 horror books in my life, and that was Insomnia and Cell by Stephen King. I have read an occasional thriller, but the last time I read a thriller and a horror was probably when I was a senior in high school. So it's been a minute. I've really just gotten back into reading in the last year and a half, and I've stayed primarily in literary fiction and romance with the occasional fantasy novels, but I really have not ventured into horror. So with it being spooky season, fall, etc., I was like, what better time of year to actually explore a new genre, specifically the horror genre? So my mom just picked this book for her book club's book this month, and I was like, okay, yeah, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, like that kind of sounds cute and comedic, like maybe it'll be a comedy horror, kind of like Death of a Unicorn. A good way for me to ease my way into the genre. And while there are very well balanced comedic elements to this novel, it is definitely not a comedy horror. It is a horror, straight up. I was horrified. When I tell you I didn't want to get up to turn my light off last night, I slept with the lights on. I can't tell you, I don't think I've ever done that, even after watching like a horror movie or true crime something or other. So yes, she was definitely a great introduction to the horror genre, not easing me in, just dunking me in head first. We follow Patricia Campbell, I don't know how to say her last name. Patricia Campbell in suburban Charleston, North Carolina, where she lives with her husband and her 2 kids. And after a absolutely miserable first time attending local book club, a few of the ladies decided they're gonna make their own book club. And they basically read a bunch of trashy true crime novels. And they're not actually trashy, they belittle themselves constantly. It's the same conversation we have about romance books and stuff like that, where it's still reading, it still counts. Just because it's not like something considered an intellectual classic doesn't mean that it's any less deserving. Or anyway, so they create their own little not a book club, and for years they go through a bunch of true crime novels, true crime classics, romances, etc. Every year they make a list and they take turns discussing and hosting the book club. As things start to get a little bit odd in her suburban neighborhood, it's up to Patricia to protect herself and her family, and that is what we get to watch her do in this novel. One thing I wanted to say was I was very hesitant. I went into this book blind. I knew nothing about Grady Hendrix. I didn't know if Grady Hendrix was a man or a woman. I didn't know anything about the premise of the book. I was like, I'm just gonna read it because I wanted to be able to discuss it with my mom. When I did start reading it, I was so sure that Grady Hendrix was a woman just because of how he writes women. I have never, ever read female characters written this well by a man. And especially like the female experience and societal norms, the pressure it puts on women and family dynamics and everything. So I was convinced Grady Hendrix was a woman until this morning when I finally looked it up, and I was like, oh, he did a wonderful job. I mean, the way that he talks about societal norms in like the 1990s, the roles of housewives, the misogyny present in all of the relationships in their lives, the way that he addresses and acknowledges this is all very intentional, very well done, very well thought out and executed. He also has a very intentional approach to discussing race and discussing the racism present in the South in the 1990s, which is very refreshing because I've read a couple of books this year where they tried to glaze over things like that when they are obviously part of the story, and I ended up DNFing them. I've never DNF'd books the way that I have this year, but Grady Hendrix acknowledged and addressed racism and sexism and misogyny in such an intentional and well done manner that I feel like a lot of people kind of stay away from because they're scared or they don't know how. Every character provides such a fresh and unique point of view on the story and on the themes of the story, because we have this group of women in this book club, and each of them is a different, like, almost a caricature of a stereotypical 1990s housewife. Like, Patricia feels like she's inept in social situations. We have Slick, who is low-key in religious psychosis. Grace, who is just very, very, very passionate about being a housewife and keeping a pristine house. Those are the three that stick out the most to me, but there were 2 other women in the book club. And each one of them provides such a unique point of view and has their own unique story going on. While we primarily get to see everything from Patricia's point of view, it was still really cool, the little bits that we got to see and hear about the other women's lives. The prose was super witty and detailed. I remember last night, it's literally in my vlog that I posted yesterday, that I paused my time lapse because I had to like address the fact that we went from discussing witty one-liners at a book club to suddenly this gruesome attack, and the complete 180 and then the 180 back to kind of the comedic era of the story was so unsteadying. But it was not unsteadying in a bad way. It was just like I felt so enraptured and engaged in the story in a way I really didn't think I'd be able to. And I was like, oh, okay. But that's the point that I really was like, I'm now binge reading. Like, I'm not putting this book down. One thing that I think Grady Hendrix explored really, really well in this novel was the complexities of relationships in these women's lives, between their relationships with their husbands, with their children, with themselves, and with their friends. It was nauseating at a lot of the points, because we have, let's use Patricia for example. She has a very controlling and manipulative husband, and it's so normalized and it's so nauseating watching the way that he talks to her, seeing the way their children mirror how he talks to her, and then seeing how her own thoughts are echoing and mirroring the way that they are talking to her. We see a shift through the events of the book, and we see a shift in her head in the way that she talks to herself and that she thinks about herself. And it's like, the craziest part is, one, there's nothing that excuses that, but she's talking down to herself as if she's some worthless little girl that doesn't do anything, that has no education. It's like, ma'am, you are running a household. Like, she keeps everything clean, she gets people where they need to go, she cooks every single day, she deals with all the drama, and on top of all of that, she was a nurse. She's highly educated. There's no, and I don't think I've been this mad at a book in a while, and it's kind of refreshing. I love when they can depict things really awfully realistically, because then it's like, oh. Finally, back to the topic of how he addressed racism and stuff like that. Miss Green was my favorite character. Miss Green stood on business. She was not fucking with anybody. All she cared about was protecting her community, as she should. And the way that she never ever shies away from confrontation, she holds those people accountable, and she's like, don't you dare try and make yourself feel better about what you did. You ignored me, you ignored my community, you abandoned us because we are somehow less to you. And the way she stood on business, no matter what, no matter how uncomfortable the situation, was really, really wonderful, because I've seen time and time again in different books, whether it's a romance book, a literary fiction, a fantasy, where some people just kind of roll over and they're like, I don't know how to explain it. They just kind of roll over and take it. And I love that Mrs. Green was very, very, very confrontational and stood on business. She was not playing with them. Finally, I want to talk about the themes and antagonists in this book. Going into this, I was like, okay, we're gonna watch them investigate and kill some vampires, whatever. But as I read the book, you kind of realize that the point of the book is the antagonist is not really the vampire. He's one of them. His name is James. He's one of the antagonists, but he's not even, in my opinion, the primary antagonist, which could be different based on how you interpret it, how you read it, and stuff like that. But the primary antagonist in this book is Patricia's husband. Patricia's husband continuously dehumanizes and demeans and belittles her and controls every aspect of her life in crazy and terrifying ways. And James, the reason he is able to sink his claws into Patricia and her community and her family is because she feels so alone and she feels so miserable and lost and worthless. And then there's this charming, attractive man who cares about her thoughts, cares about the books she reads, who is nice to her, who calls out her daughter for being a little brat and like trying to belittle and demean her mother in front of him. And just that desperation to be understood and seen and loved is what caused her to open her door to him. And it's not because he forced his way in or even necessarily, like, obviously he tricked her and he wasn't doing anything for a good reason, but had she not been treated the way that she was, she probably would not have opened her door as quickly. She's a true crime fanatic. She reads true crime books. She literally compares him to Ted Bundy and how Ted Bundy was able to get women to do things because he was attractive and charming and intelligent. And that is exactly the playbook that Grady Hendrix wrote James out of. So she's got this seemingly perfect life because she's very privileged in a lot of ways. But if she had just been in a more loving marriage, if she was treated with more respect, if she felt fulfilled in those areas and didn't feel this gaping hole in her chest, so much of this wouldn't have happened. Well, it may not have happened. There's a very high chance that it could have still happened because he did also worm his way into the husband's lives and he fit in really well in the community because he was a rich, attractive white man. But it's just really interesting, and I like how Grady Hendrix kind of wove those together, and it makes you think like, okay, what could have been different? I really enjoy in the back of this book, you know, they have the book club questions. Let me find them. And I thought a couple of them were pretty interesting. The response to reports of missing children in 6 Mile versus the Old Village differs greatly among both residents and law enforcement. What are the social implications of these differing reactions, and how do they influence the way the story plays out? And this is one of the things that Miss Green brings up over and over and over again, because if the threat had been to children in Mount Pleasant from the beginning, this all would have been handled, and so many children's deaths could have been prevented. If people cared about people of color and children of color and women of color the way that they should, because they're another human being and they deserve the same respect and dignity, then so many deaths could have been prevented. But because the threat was to people of color and the main characters in these books see them as below them and as not as important as it not affecting them, people died. And that is just, I mean, it's very, very, very realistic. And this takes place in the 1990s, so we're talking theoretically like 30 years ago. But we still see this nowadays in our current political climate. We still see the resources used to find a missing white teenager or a missing white child are very, very different from the resources put towards trying to find missing women and children of color. If there's any resources put towards it, I mean, it's really insane to think about the fact that our society as a whole is just okay with certain people dying and being victimized by evil men just because they look different or they don't offer as much in their white-centered minds. And I think I love how Grady Hendrix brings all of this up, and it's talked about in the book directly. It's not just something that you have to read through subtext. I mean, we constantly have Miss Green bringing this up and trying to get those characters to understand that they are not special. They are not worth more. That they are all mothers, and that her community deserves the same respect and resources and care as their community. Overall, this book was amazing. Grady Hendrix has just earned a spot on my auto-buy list. It's only one book, so I need to read more of his work to see if he gets to keep that spot on my auto-buy list. But so far, this book was a 5 stars, a 5-star read. I do have another one of his books on my shelf, and I will be reading that very soon. It's called The Final Girl Support Group, so it's also on my list of fall/spooky season reads. It's about a group of girls who have survived like these horrific tragedies, and each character is kind of an ode to a character from a classic horror movie. I recommend this to anybody who is into literary fiction, definitely, because I think that the nuanced exploration of women's lives and relationships will appeal to anybody that's into romance or literary fiction. It is a bit gory, but I think it was really well written. It was really cool. So if you like my content, don't forget to check me out on TikTok and on Substack. On TikTok, I post a lot of creative and bookish content. And on Substack, I just kind of yap away on paper, book reviews, essays, articles, research papers, etc. Thank you so much for watching.